Hi guys, I'm Erik Voss, and I just saw Logan, and this was really one of the best films in the superhero genre that I have ever seen. Like, this is exactly the Hugh Jackman Wolverine movie that we've been wanting, somehow topping X-Men Origins. What? But really, other than this being a poignant, emotionally powerful redemption tale and conclusion to Jackman's portrayal of the Wolverine character, Logan hinted at a lot of interesting theories about the X-Men universe. So in this video, I'm gonna quickly offer my best explanations for those big questions and how Logan fits into the X-Men timeline. And obviously, huge spoiler warning here. Go watch the movie first and then come meet me back here. Okay, first up, biggest question a lot of you have been wondering about. What happened to the X-Men? So throughout the movie, it's implied that pretty much all of the old mutants have died off. Specifically, there's a mention of a mysterious Westchester incident, and a radio broadcast reports the deaths of hundreds of people and 7 mutants before it gets turned off. Now, obviously, Westchester, New York is the location of Charles Xavier's Institute. And later in the film, Charles confesses his guilt over accidentally killing mutants. Now, this was probably the result of one of his mass seizures, which occur throughout the movie when Charles doesn't take his meds, causing everyone in the nearby vicinity to be paralyzed, unable to breathe. Now, Logan and Laura seem to be able to sustain it with their regeneration powers, but Caliban mentions that it could have killed him. Also, several people in that casino look severely injured or dead. And then earlier in the film, Donald Pierce says that Charles Xavier's mind was labeled as a weapon of mass destruction by the government. So I think that all of this stems from this Westchester incident when Charles suffered a massive seizure, killing 7 mutants, except Logan, the only one strong enough to survive it. Now, who were those 7 mutants? We may never find out, but my guess is that it's some mix of the faces that we saw at the end of Days of Future Past, like Rogue, Storm, Hank McCoy, Kitty Pryde, Iceman, and maybe Scott Summers and Jean Grey, but I feel like Jean Grey would be powerful enough to sustain it, and I have another thought about Cyclops that I'll bring up in a bit. But this brings me to another question. Is Logan in the X-Men movie timeline? So yes, according to the director. While marketing the film, James Mangold and Hugh Jackman suggested that Logan would be its own solo story set in the year 2029. Not so much concerned with the continuity of the X-Men timeline like the other movies are. But technically, it does take place in the timeline as it was reset in Days of Future Past. The events of that movie and X-Men Apocalypse are part of this movie's backstory. So for example, at the end of the movie, Logan learns that Xander Rice was the son of a scientist whom he killed in the Alkali Lake lab, which we saw in X-Men Apocalypse. There's also an awesome moment when someone says to Logan, "I heard you were in Phoenix." You know, in Phoenix? Yeah, I'm sure Logan is very proud of that point in the timeline. Now, there are a lot of other Easter eggs that I plan to break down in greater depth in another video. But next question, what about the other mutants? One of the big mysteries of the film is why mutants have been dying off. Pierce mentions early on that most naturally occurring mutants have gone extinct, like the tiger, which is also apparently extinct in 2029. There's also a newspaper headline that refers to the decline of mutant birth rates. This whole movie has a Children of Men vibe, with a mutant fertility crisis leading to this old man sacrificing himself to ensure the survival of this young generation of mutants. And at the end of the movie, we learned what caused this mutant extinction. Xander Rice and his company were slipping an anti-mutant toxin into corporate food and water supplies, basically orchestrating mutant genocide through the stuff we consume every day. In fact, this is set up earlier in the film, with Logan talking with the farmer Morrison about how big government took over the water lines and all the nearby corn plantations to make sugar and corn syrup, which are in pretty much everything we eat. And before that, there's another scene that underlines how dangerous all this corporatization and automation are to the little guy, with the self-driving semi-trucks running Logan off the highway. So that brings me to another question. How does this all fit in with Xander Rice's plan? So Rice's goal was to gradually wipe out all natural mutants so that he could have a monopoly on his own artificial weaponized mutants created in his Transigen lab in Mexico City. He did that by fertilizing Mexican women with the DNA gathered from mutants, with Logan's DNA used to make X-23 Laura. But after his experiments to control the children failed, Rice had a breakthrough with X-24, an adult clone of Wolverine. Rice explained in the middle of the movie that children have to be taught rage and loyalty, whereas an adult Wolverine clone could just be programmed with it. And now that X X-24 made them unnecessary, Rice had the other kids killed, but the nursing staff in the facility helped them escape, leading Rice using Pierce and the Reavers and X-24 to hunt them down. Bringing me to the next question, what is Eden and is it real? So early in the film, the nurse Gabriella hires Logan to take Laura to specific coordinates in North Dakota. But shortly after that, Logan flips through Laura's X-Men comics and sees the same coordinates belonging to a fictional mutant sanctuary called Eden. So at this point, he assumes it's all made up. But then later on, we learn that the kids actually did use the coordinates as a rendezvous point at this lookout tower in North Dakota. So they're not just random coordinates, they did lead to something. And we hear one of these kids talk to someone over the radio telling them that they've been approved across the Canadian border. They just have to run 8 miles north through the woods. So where are these kids going exactly? And who were they talking to over the radio? And is there an actual mutant sanctuary called Eden, like the comic suggested? So it seems like the movie is saying Eden was indeed fictional, but the kids used the concept of Eden and the coordinates in the comics to meet up at this outpost. Then presumably they would cross the border into Canada, where Rice and his men couldn't follow them. And that guy they were talking to was probably some friendly Canadian who was just going to meet them north of the border to ensure their safe passage. However, I have a theory, and it's kind of a stretch, but just hear me out. I think that it's possible that Eden is real, and that's where the kids are headed at the end of the movie. And maybe we'll see Eden if there's ever a sequel that follows X-23. Here's where I'm coming from on this. When Logan argues with Laura about the comics and whether they're real, he makes a condescending reference to the writer of the comics like they were an X-Men insider who lied about what really happened. So I think that it's possible that the person behind the comics was actually one of the X-Men. And which of the X-Men has Wolverine historically found the most aggravating? Cyclops, right? So whether it was Cyclops or someone else, I think they might have snuck in these coordinates into the comics as a secret message to mutants, leading them to this outpost meeting place. And then once they arrived there, he would get in touch with them and tell them to cross the border to get taken to Eden, a real secret place run by real surviving mutants. And those mutants could have been the voices on the other end of that radio call. Now, maybe that's how you read this already, or maybe this theory is totally bogus, but I think it's possible and it's interesting, so shut up. And anyway, speaking of that comic book, one final big question. What are the X-Men in the world of Logan? I talked about this in one of my trailer breakdowns, but it's kind of crazy that specific Uncanny X-Men comic books show up in this movie. Like, I get that these heroes would have a fan following. For example, over in the MCU, there are those Captain America trading cards, but remember, those were made for like war propaganda purposes. They were justified in the world of the movie. And those are not nearly as meta as having the fans of the X-Men chronicle their history with actual X-Men comics, and for those comics to be the same version of the comics that inspired all of these movies. And by the way, I should say that these aren't real-life X-Men comic issues, but Fox did bring in the X-Men artist Joe Quesada to illustrate them so that they'd have the same look and design. So what do these comics mean? And why does another New Mutant kid have a Wolverine action figure? And why do they trim his beard to give him the classic Wolverine mutton chops? And why do we see Pierce keep addressing Wolverine, Charles, and Caliban as if they were former celebrities? So again, my theory is that this is all the end result of whoever created the comic books within this universe spreading and popularizing this distorted legend about the X-Men in order to try to keep mutants relevant and popular among young generations, and yeah, maybe to secretly rescue mutant refugees. And a side effect of this underground comic book propaganda campaign is that mutants like Wolverine became pop culture figures. But unfortunately, that led to two bad consequences. One, since Wolverine is recognizable, it makes it that much harder for him to try to blend in and get around undetected whenever he tries to stay out of trouble. And two, since the mutants were more popular in the general public, instead of hunting them down or detaining them or restricting their rights like in the past, Xander Rice came up with a secret toxin to wipe them all out, which ended up being far more lethal and effective. But really, what I love about this is not only does it create this interesting reality for the world of the story, it brings Logan back to where X-Men all started, the comics that we read and loved as kids. This was Hugh Jackman's final performance as Wolverine, and it's so fitting that we say goodbye to him as he's surrounded by kids clutching Wolverine toys. Those kids represent us, the nerds. Like, many of us were around this age when we first saw Jackman play Wolverine, and even if you were older, admit it, you still had that action figure. And I just love how Logan, which is a grounded, gritty, realistic Western, still uses X-Men fan service in these targeted ways to deliver this perfect emotional finale. Okay, that covers all the big stuff, and you may have had other questions about Logan, but as I mentioned, I'll be working on another breakdown of the movie, so keep an eye out for that. Also, be sure to check out my video about the Deadpool 2 preview scene that played before the movie. And let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe to New Rockstars, and share this video to all your friends. You can also contribute to us on Patreon. Big thanks to all of our current patrons, especially Kenny Smith. You can hit me up on Twitter at EA Voss with any thoughts or questions that you had about Logan, or follow New Rockstars on Twitter at New Rockstars for updates on our videos. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.